Hey everyone, today is April 4th of 2025. In today's video, we're going to talk about a very bizarre news story out of Frisco, Texas, where a student athlete was reportedly stabbed to death at a track meet for simply telling someone at a rival school to stop sitting under his school's tent. In the description below, I linked to the interview that Fox News had with the father less than 24 hours after learning his son was killed. And there's a lot of weird things in the news these days, but this is up there. And it really seemed like the father was hitting scripted talking points more than grieving the loss of his son. Now, what makes this story so interesting, on top of the fact that this interview was so strange, is that the student arrested for the murder is named Carmelo Anthony. Well, this story was published on April 3rd, yesterday, one day after the stabbing. And on April 3rd, the same exact day, we learned that former NBA player Carmelo Anthony was elected to the 2025 NBA Hall of Fame class. Now, this is the type of synchronicity or coincidence that should make anyone shudder. But there's a lot more to this. Carmelo Anthony wore number 15 for the Denver Nuggets. My last video on this channel is about the death of Val Kilmer and how it connects to number 15 of the Denver Nuggets, Nikola Jokic. You'll find this video linked down below in the description as well. Now, the last time I talked about Carmelo Anthony and Nikola Jokic, number 15 on the Nuggets, it was when Carmelo announced his retirement officially. That happened just as the 2023 NBA Finals was getting underway. The same finals that Jokic and the Nuggets won. Now, in my video from yesterday, I talked about a riddle connected to gold. The Denver Nuggets, named after gold miners of the 19th century. And this brings us to the book of Exodus, with the story of the golden calf. Well, the name of the victim in the story we learned about yesterday is Metcalf. Now, April 3rd, the date of this news, is also the same date in history that many historians believe Jesus was crucified on the cross. So we will explore the biblical riddle of the crucifixion of Jesus embedded into this story. And in this interview, the student's father talks a lot about his faith in God and how the killer shouldn't be judged. He made a point to say it wasn't about race or politics, and neither was the crucifixion of Jesus. Just days before he died, Austin Metcalf made a post about his faith in God. And according to this article, this was a bit of a change in pace, as he normally didn't post about his faith. Now, Metcalf's father, Jeff, is asking for $240,000 for the death of his son. I'd like to think my parents wouldn't go to the public asking for $250,000, but they didn't ask for $250,000. They asked for $240,000, most of which they've received already. Now, why this number 240 and not like 200 or 250? This brings us to Latin Gematria, where the phrase crucifixion of Jesus Christ equals 2040. This cipher is what I claim to be the most significant in the study of Gematria, essentially bridging the gap between Hebrew and Greek and the current standard alphabetic order. We are also going to look at how this connects to a musician named Nicholas Eade, whose name is now Nick Van Eade. Because this man wrote a song called I Just Died in Your Arms Tonight, which reached #1 in the United Kingdom back in 1986. And that's the big crux of this story. This teenager died in his twin brother's arms. So we're actually going to look at how that song is synced to the date of this news story. The song was even by a group called Cutting Crew. And here we're talking about a story about a stabbing, or a cutting, one might say. Finally, this story happened in the Dallas, Texas area. And Dallas, Texas is where former President John F. Kennedy was shot. So we're going to look at how this connects to John F. Kennedy, also the death of John F. Kennedy Jr. in a plane crash. And when it comes to plane crashes, of course, this points to a significant 9/11 riddle. Notice how this student was reportedly stabbed in section 107. Notice how there's a special piece of paper here that appears to only be on this one section, saying section 107. In standard reduction gematria, also called Pythagorean, which is one of the base 4 methods of gematria, the name John Fitzgerald Kennedy equals 107. And measuring from John F. Kennedy's birthday, back in 1917, we find out that he would be 107 years old if he were still alive and really old. JFK would actually be 39,390 days old. And that stands out because this news story was also 9,393 days after the death of JFK Jr. And then news of this story was published on April 3rd, which is the 93rd day of the year. 93, an important number. God's Son equals 93 in the alphabetic order. So does crucifix. Jesus of Nazareth is what was labeled above the cross. And of course, in Sumerian, Christianity equals 930, the number of years that Adam lives to in the Old Testament. So let's get into the numerology of this, as hopefully you understand there is a significant amount of synchronicity. But now let's look at the numbers, the glue that ties this story together. Really digging into the script here with this part of it. So this stabbing incident occurred on April 2nd, or 4/2, this past Wednesday. The name of the man arrested, Carmelo, sums to 42. The word stab equals 42. And the student he stabbed was named Austin, which is 42. Also, this is the capital of Texas, Austin. And then he died in the arms of his twin brother. Twin equals 42. The school this happened at is located on the 33rd parallel and 96th meridian. Notice how the phrase track meet equals both 33 and 96. And when have you ever heard about one student athlete stabbing another one to death at a track meet? So again, this all occurring the same day that basketball player Carmelo Anthony was elected to the Hall of Fame. Carmelo Anthony's full name, Carmelo Kiam Anthony, has matching 1,269 gematria with Frisco, Texas, the city where this stabbing occurred. We'll talk a lot about how this connects to the World Trade Center which was originally opened in 1973 and was then destroyed in a terror attack in 2001. Notice how Carmelo Anthony was born during Brown lunation number 759. Every new moon since 1923 has been numbered. Well, this is the standard gematria of the word twin. 759. The Twin Towers originally opened with a dedication date of April 4th. This means that if you include the end date, this news story was published exactly 52 years after the opening of the Twin Towers. The news came out on a date with primary numerology of 52. And in Gematria, the word stabbing equals 52. However, in the Sumerian method of Gematria, where we take the alphabetic order and multiply every number by 6, here we find that the word stabbing equals 444, which is a very significant number in the crucifixion. Killing, Jesus, cross, Messiah, gospel, all 444 in this same Sumerian cipher. Well, look at how old basketball player Carmelo Anthony was when the student Carmelo Anthony was arrested. Exactly 40 years and 44 weeks old. When the Twin Towers were destroyed, it was the 444th prime number of days after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Carmelo Anthony played a total of 1,260 games during his NBA career, for which he was just elected to the Hall of Fame. In Latin Gematria, the date September 11th sums to 1,260. In the alphabetic order, September 11th shares 194 Gematria with the year 2001. And if you measure from his final NBA game to the date of this news, it was 1,094 days after Carmelo's career ended. Now, on the same date that the Twin Towers collapsed, we also got this very special book called Life of Pi, which has been a big topic on this channel lately, as we just had the Pi Day eclipse on 3/14, March 14th. Pi, of course, begins with 3.14. Well, check out Carmelo's age for the 9/11 attacks. Not only was he 3 months and 14 days after his birthday, but he was also a total of 6,314 days old. This story comes out of the city of Frisco, Texas, which equals 314 with capital letters. The victim's brother, Hunter, his name equals 314. But there's a lot more connecting Carmelo Anthony to the city of Dallas. Notice how in the standard alphabetic order, Carmelo's full name sums to 214. Frisco, Texas is a suburb of Dallas where the primary phone area code is 214. In fact, Carmelo Anthony in the reverse order also equals 214. This news was published on the date leaving 272 days in the year. And this is the reverse value of Carmelo's full name. 272 in the reverse order. The prior day, when Metcalf was stabbed to death, was the 92nd day of the year. The word twin equals 92 with capital letters. But also notice how the name Karmelo Kiam Anthony sums to 92. Also, in reverse satanic, his name equals 902. Well, the name Anthony on its own also equals 92 and 902. Well, on the date of the 9/11 attacks in 2001, Carmelo Anthony was exactly 902 weeks of age. On the date of this news story, Carmelo was 14,920 days old. Back in 1986, the song I Just Died in Your Arms was the #1 hit in the United Kingdom for the week ending September 20th, or 9/20. And check out the name of the song. I Just Died in Your Arms equals 92 in reduction. The man who wrote the song, the frontman of Cutting Crew, Nick Van Eede, look at how old he was for this stabbing. He was a span of 9 months and 20 days old after his birthday, on April 2nd. Just crazy. There's a strong skull and bones riddle in here as well. Remember, the president, when the World Trade Center collapsed, was George W. Bush, a bonesman. I Just Died in Your Arms equals both 254 and 2001. The Twin Towers collapsed on the 254th day of 2001. So we'll come back to the Skull and Bones code in a little bit, but I want to point out the intense numerical connections this story has to the Kennedy family, particularly John and John Jr. Remember the JFK files being released recently. So this has been another big theme on this channel. Kennedy was killed in Dallas, Texas, which sums to 118 in the alphabetic order. Carmelo Anthony was born exactly 11 years and 8 weeks after the World Trade Center opened. Carmelo Anthony was born on May 29th. John F. Kennedy was born on May 29th. Of course, the 29th of May, or 295. These are huge numbers connected to the World Trade Center and the Skull and Bones Society, whose big number is 322, the number on their emblem. Well, yesterday's news was published a span of exactly 3,202 weeks after Kennedy's assassination. 322. Kennedy and Carmelo were born exactly 67 years or 804 months apart from each other. This story out of Frisco, Texas, which equals 67, matching the ordinal value of Carmelo, 67. And now the victim's name in this story is Austin, and Austin equals 84. So, come on. Carmelo born 67 years or 804 months after JFK. Carmelo 67, Austin 84. If you also measure from the assassination to the date of the news, notice how it was 61 years and 19 weeks later. So you have the digits in 9/11 upside down and reversed. Skull and Bones headquartered in New Haven, which has the 1019. The last name Anthony equals 1019. Metcalf equals 119. His brother's name, Hunter Metcalf, equals 1190. Austin was stabbed to death a span of exactly 1 year and 19 weeks before the next total solar eclipse. His death was also 8,605 days after the 9/11 attacks. JFK was exactly 86 years and 5 months old when Carmelo Anthony played his first NBA game. But perhaps the bigger alignment here is that Carmelo Anthony was exactly 233 months old for his big debut. That's the ordinal gematria of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 233. And yesterday's news was 233 days before the anniversary of the assassination. Kennedy and Carmelo were both born 233 days after the date October 9th. And October 9th is the founding date of Yale University, home to Skull and Bones. These same 3 digits are also found in Yale's current age, 323 years. But JFK Jr. is also strongly connected to this riddle. John died on the 16th of July, or 16/7. And 167 is the 39th prime number. And look at the name of the victim, Austin 167, Metcalf 39. JFK shot on the date leaving 39 days in the year. And now Austin Metcalf dies 39,390 days after JFK was born, and 9,393 days after JFK Jr. died. So I want to look again at this opening date for the World Trade Center. April 4th, or 4/4. This brings us into an intriguing riddle with solar eclipses as well, especially eclipses over the state of Texas. So Austin Metcalf was stabbed exactly 44 weeks after May 29th, the date of birth for both Carmelo Anthony and John F. Kennedy. Then the word stab equals 404. The first name Austin also equals 440. Well, the 44th prime number is 193. Austin was stabbed 1,093 days after Carmelo's last NBA game. JFK was assassinated 1,093 days after JFK Jr. was born. Both John F. Kennedy and assassinated sum to 193 in reverse. And don't forget, Kennedy was killed when he was exactly 193 mercurial years old. But the huge 44 connection with John F. Kennedy, who won the 44th U.S. presidential election. Remember, the word kill equals 44 in ordinal. Kennedy was killed exactly 44 years to the day in Dallas after an annular solar eclipse that passed over the city of Dallas. In fact, this eclipse began like right here where my mouse is. It began in Texas. Austin Metcalf died 261 days after the anniversary of Junior's plane crash, and 360 days after last year's total solar eclipse, which also passed over Dallas. And in Gematria, the name John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. equals 261 and 360. 360 also like Metcalf. Now, this eclipse that I'm talking about from 1919, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more here. All right, so this eclipse here was on November 22nd of 1919. Exactly 44 years before Kennedy was killed in Dallas there. And in the year 1919, we had another solar eclipse that was on JFK's birthday, May 29th. And this one was the longest total eclipse in over 500 years. Whereas this was the longest annular eclipse in almost 300 years. So a very significant year for eclipses, 1919. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But to start to end this video, I want to dive deeper into this riddle with the song, I Just Died in Your Arms. Because this was a detail of this story that was repeated over and over throughout all of this news. When this song was released back in 1986, Carmelo Anthony was 787 days old. Using the capital letter cipher, where we mix in capital and small letters together with the alphabetic order, Cutting Crew, I Just Died in Your Arms equals 787, like Yale Skull and Bones in Satanic. And this is, of course, a type of airplane, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, Boeing's largest aircraft. Well, if you measure from the release of this song to the date of the 9/11 attacks, you get 5,527 days apart. This was Carmelo Anthony's exact age when JFK Jr. died in a plane crash. 5,527 days of age. And in Latin Gematria, skull and bones equals 527. When this song was released on the 25th, notice how John F. Kennedy Jr. was also born on the 25th of the month. So JFK Jr. was exactly 308 months old for that song's release. And then he died in a plane crash, which equals 308. Austin Metcalf died 308 days after JFK and Carmelo Anthony's birthday. The word stabbing equals 38 in reduction. And this stabbing occurred 308 months after JFK Jr.'s plane crash. JFK and Carmelo were born on the 216th day, actually 216 days remaining in the year. The name Carmelo Anthony 216. When JFK Jr. died, he was exactly 2,016 weeks of age. This is the Latin gematria of the word airplane. So what amazing alignments that we discovered here that truly show the undeniable scripting of this, I just want to call it a ridiculous news story. You know, this makes no sense. Just none of it makes sense. Especially when you watch the interview with the father and then learn they're asking for almost $250,000 for their own suffering. You know, if they want to make the family of the stabber pay $240,000 or something, or the stabber himself, then great. But something about a GoFundMe that just doesn't sit well with this creator right here. I don't know why. Now, in the alphabetic order, If you write out cutting crew, I just died in your arms, notice how you get a value of 397. This stabbing occurred exactly 397 lunar phases after the World Trade Center was bombed. It was also 397 weeks after the first Great American Eclipse over the United States. This is the 78th prime number, which matches Austin, who went to Memorial High School. Life of Pi also has this 78. But I also want to touch on a riddle connected to another former president, the one who just most recently passed away, Jimmy Carter, who died on December 29th, which just so happened to be the same date as a major plane crash. Jeju Air, Flight 2216 crashing in Korea. And looking back at things, this was the first of a string of many, many plane crashes to start occurring here in the United States. James Earl Carter Jr. also has the 78. So notice how Jimmy Carter also sums to 322, the skull and bones number. Well, his full name, James Earl Carter, also equals 149. This is the same as Skull and Bones 149. JFK and Carmelo Anthony, both born on the 149th day of the year. Twin has gematria of 1049, while twins equals 149. The man arrested in this news story, Karmelo, sums to 149. And JFK Jr. would have been 14,900 days old for the September 11th attacks. In fact, Carmelo Anthony just turned 14,900 days old last month. Jimmy Carter died on the date 12/29. And now Austin Metcalf dies 1,229 weeks after the 9/11 attacks. In Latin, Skull and Bones Society equals 1229. Stabbing, Carmelo, both 229. So with all of this skull and bones numerology, I figured, okay, there was a massively important skull and bones date back in 2023 when Yale University turned 322 years old. Austin Metcalf was stabbed 541 days after that date. The name Carmelo Keem Anthony sums to 541 with capital letters. And this is the 100th prime number. Stabbing equals 100, so does Memorial High School, where Austin attended. The World Trade Center opened on a date with 100 numerology. The man who wrote the song I Just Died in Your Arms, his birth name, Nicholas Eade, sums to 100. And do you remember how old Jimmy Carter was when he died? That's right, he was 100 years old. Now, if you look at Jimmy Carter's age for the stabbing in Frisco, Texas, he would have been 100 years, 6 months, and 2 days of age. Jimmy Carter equals 162, so does JFK. Also, James Earl Carter Jr., his full name, 1062. Yale Skull and Bones, 1602 as well. When Carter died in December, Carmelo Anthony was the 93rd prime number of months old exactly. And there's a lot more 93 that I discussed in this post. Talked about this number at the beginning of the video. Songwriter Nick Van Eede has matching 93 Gematria with Carmelo. And on the date that we learned about this news story yesterday, Nick Van Eede was also 9 months and 3 weeks after his birthday exactly. So to wrap this up, let's talk about the total eclipse code once again. Now, we talked a little bit about Life of Pi. And in that movie, the main character survives a shipwreck for 227 days. And most of you watching probably know this by now, but 22 divided by 7 is 314 in Gematria. And this also works on a calculator. This is the smallest equation you can use to get the first 3 digits of pi, 22 divided by 7. Which is why Alt 227 gives you the pi symbol on a Windows keyboard. So, isn't it intriguing that Carmelo Anthony was born exactly 20 years and 27 weeks after JFK was assassinated? This is also 1,070 weeks, matching John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was a ritual sacrifice, 107. And now JFK, who was born in the year 17, would be 107 years old. Well, 107 is a prime number, the 28th prime number. And in the ancient Hebrew language, total solar eclipse sums to 280. And for the total solar eclipse that passed over Dallas, Texas last year, Carmelo Anthony was a span of exactly 2,080 weeks old. Carmelo was also born 280 days after Kobe Bryant's birthday. But when Austin Metcalf was stabbed, it was exactly 28 months before a total solar eclipse that passes over Egypt in 2027. Songwriter Nicholas Eade has that 280 Gematria. Also 240 because this is also 2 years and 4 months. Now, this total solar eclipse in Egypt is not the next total eclipse, but I point it out because it belongs to this special Saros series, 136. This is the special Saros series to the Jesuits. The Jesuits equals 136. The Jesuits were founded just 3 days before an eclipse from this Saros series. And think about it, right? Jesus crucified, and then 3 days later he rises. And in the year 1919, we had an eclipse from this Saros on JFK's birthday. Saros Series 136 even started in the year 1360, when the date was still 13/6 in the Western Hemisphere. So if you happen to want to learn more about the riddle with 136, I suggest checking my video out on the Logan Paul interview with Donald Trump, which was indeed a numeric tribute to Saros 136. This interview was even uploaded on the 13th of June, the anniversary of the start of that Saros. So I think that just about does it for this video. I do have a couple more notes, but they're pretty insignificant. Carmelo Anthony, for instance, born in the year 1984, a lot like his name in Sumerian. And I briefly mentioned Kobe Bryant And when you check Kobe Bryant's age for the stabbing, you get the same 4 digits as you would get when you type out Jesus Christ. 1275. Kobe has the 1725 in his age. Oh, look at that. Also 223 days after his birthday. But I think that's enough for now. Just so you guys know, I'm going to be live with Decoding with Cody shortly after this stream wraps up. We're going to tackle the video that we attempted to do a few days ago, but were derailed from. We're going to talk about Alex Ovechkin, who is about to break Wayne Gretzky's all-time goals record. The Russian megastar is just 3 goals away from breaking the record now, and he's got 7 games to do it. So a few days ago, I made a post on why I think the record might be broken on April 17th, the final game of the season, but he might actually break it sooner than that because he already scored 2 goals since I made this post. So, but if you want to learn more about that riddle, there's a lot that goes into it. Cody has a bunch more as well. So we'll be chatting about that in a little bit. But for now, guys, that'll do it. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. Once again, check the links in the description for related links and videos. Or if you'd like to support the work by joining the website at gematrinator.com and helping to grow this intellectual movement as we hope to wake up the masses around the globe to the wonderful beauty that is the geometry of the universe. Thanks again for watching. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you all next time. See ya.